listening to the Exitology Unlock Your Profits, Unlock Your Potential show on the number one global business talk and news network on the internet, IBGR, International Business Growth Radio, the world of business at your fingertips. I am Jason Wally Waldron, the secret weapon behind owners, founders, and CEOs of blue-collar and industrial companies who apply Exitology to grow faster and maximize the value of their business. When these owners feel trapped in their businesses, we apply Exitology so you can buy back your time and freedom. I am your host for today's show. This season, we are continuing the theme of last season, and we are discussing creating lasting value even in a challenging economy. And I am thrilled to be joined here today by a gentleman named Lee Benson. He is the creator of the Mind methodology, and he is the author of a book called Your Most Important Number. Lee has many, many years of experience working in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, and a number of other different businesses, which he will tell you about in just a moment. And you can find more about his company at etw.com. Lee, welcome to the show.
Wally, it's so good to be here. Thank you.
So I'd love to just open this up and tell us about who you are, where you came from, and how did you arrive at what is now known as your most important number, and specifically the Mind methodology?
Yeah, sure. I'm on my seventh company I've started from scratch, and I've had exits from a few $1 million to well into 9 figures. And the biggest company that I built, and I actually sold it in January of 2016, was called Able Aerospace. And we did business in 60 countries around the world. We had about 2,000 customers, and we did over 95% of everything in-house. And what we did is we repaired, overhauled, and manufactured aircraft parts to safely reduce aircraft operating costs when aircraft operators were doing maintenance to either helicopters or large fixed-wing aircraft. And wow, was that challenging, starting with 3 employees and almost going out of business about 15 times the first year, and then growing to what we did and having the exit that we had. All the way along, it was all about how do I get everybody fully aligned to creating the most value, making the best decisions to do the right work at the right time in the right order, and then really drive a culture of accountability where people are doing what they said they would a majority of the time. Mm-hmm. And so for a number of evolutionary things in terms of figuring out what works, what doesn't work. And one of the things I figured out is that traditional goal setting doesn't stand the test of time. And I've worked with my current company, ETW, I work with lots of for-profit and nonprofit organizations. And when I go audit the goals, 90% of the goals aren't very thoughtful. And, CEOs will tell me everybody's hitting their goals, but the company isn't going anywhere. So there's a challenge with that. And this all evolved into something I developed called the Mind methodology. And I outline that in my book, Your Most Important Number. And Mind stands for most important number and drivers. And the way this essentially works, a simple version of it, is that every organization has one number that above all others says they're winning or losing the game. And it's very important that a most important number also drives the majority of the right behaviors. Wow. In the for-profit world, and I really love manufacturing and capital intensive type businesses. Mm-hmm. In the for-profit world, it's either some version of profit. It could be EBITDA, it could be net profit, et cetera. But if it's capital intensive, it's cash flow. When I was building my aerospace business, all I really thought about was we need to have enough cash because we can make money bottom line, but run out of cash.
Sure.
And then, so the most important number at the top of the organization was cash flow. But as we cascaded down, HR had their own most important number, marketing had their most important number, sales, supply chain, engineering, all had their most important numbers that said above all others for that team or function or department, they're winning or losing the game and will drive the majority of the right behaviors. So what I came up with here is something that every single team really enjoyed, and it caught fire on its own because the team looks at the score and says, that's the number, just like playing a professional sporting game. Says we're winning or losing. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so I want to step back for a second here because everything that you've arrived at and that you're sharing us with us right now, I want to help the listener contextualize how these concepts are real. They're not ivory tower concepts, but these are organically tested and then refined concepts down to exactly what it really takes. And ETW, tell us what that stands for in just a couple words, real quick. It's execute to win, right?
It's execute to win. That's what
Right.
it's all about.
And what I love about that is because that's going back down to that, right? You're either winning or losing in business, right? And but or in your nonprofit or in whatever whatever your endeavor is, but people, we are very, very competitive people, right? And so we have to know what it means to be winning. And so I want to take everybody back for a moment all the way. What's great about your aerospace story is that NAFTA had just happened a couple years prior to you taking over a business, and you essentially did a corporate turnaround and barely hung on for a period of time as you were setting the stage for eventually this massive success. And could you take us through maybe some of the gritty details of what did it take to stick with this and and fail your way forward until you started to really catch fire of success?
Yeah, so many lessons. During the 1980s, I made most of my money playing in a rock and roll band. That's what I did. But during the day, I worked as an electroplating operator in a very small electroplating company. And we lost all of our business overnight. We essentially had one customer. And my boss said, close it or sell it. You've got 30 days. I couldn't find anybody to buy it. We went from 25 people down to 3. And I said, well, let me take it over. I want to go this direction. I want to provide this service to helicopter operators. And he said, it'll never work. You don't know what you're doing. But if you'll assume the $600,000 in debt, I'll let you do it. So that's what I did. And with the other 2 guys, I said, look, I can't afford to pay you the first year, but I'll give you some provisional equity. And one said, man, this is fantastic. Sign me up. I just know it'll work. The other one said, it'll never work. We don't have money. We don't have customers. We don't have equipment. But you know what? Sign me up anyway. I just want to see what's going to happen. And they both did incredibly well on the exit. It was so awesome. But that first year, the only cash that we had to pay our bills with was the cash generated from the work that we actually did. Mm-hmm. And that first year was really rough, but we did well enough the second year that I was able to pay them, the first 2 gentlemen, for all the pay they didn't take the first year, which wasn't even in the deal. Mm-hmm. But we did well enough, so let's do it. And then we just kept growing from there. And I look at this as just sort of how are we creating value in the marketplace? So if they see value in this, what's synergistic? What can we add on to it? And it was just a stacking of things that made sense over time. And then we accelerated that after a couple of years.
And how many close calls do you think you had in terms of, if you think of the business models where they show you get to a certain plateau and you have a valley of death, and then you re-engineer things, and then you're able to grow to the next plateau, and so on and so forth. How many close calls do you think you had over that from 2000?
The first, yeah, good point. The first 2 years were super critical. But my mindset was, I know there's a way to get through this, no matter how tough it gets, and I'll figure it out. It's my job, even if I can't think of it today. And so these plateaus that organizations go through, there's a reason for it. And you can see it virtually everywhere. And we're going to talk about this later, but we're going to talk about leadership development, the CEO. I always thought of myself as the biggest limiting factor in the organization. If I can't think it, allow it to happen, get out of the way, whatever that is. I know that sounds nice to say, but doing it practically is much more difficult.
Right.
It'll never happen. And so I think that mindset got us there. I mean, there were a few times we got stuck for a couple of years, around the $8 million a year mark, and then changed the approach to leadership development, and wham, it just took off again, and thought about sales and marketing differently. But you can look at any organization and all the functions and how the structure is held together, the allocation of resources. And what I love about this most important number in drivers methodology, you can see the numbers for each of the departments or functions and which one is holding us back more than all the others at any point in time. And that's where you focus and do the work.
That's awesome. And so, yeah, thank you for shedding a little bit more light on exactly what it was like to do that, because the thing that I just heard, and it's going to really set up as we go deeper into these different concepts, but it was the idea of leadership from value creation, right? And it was the idea of transparency and knowing whether or not you're on track, right? Are we winning or are we not winning? Which I know you're going to go into that, but from our side of things, one thing that we touch on all the time when we're talking exitology is the idea of decentralizing the business owner and decentralizing the leadership, and then de-risking the business. And the hardest, you touched on the hardest thing to do, which is to not be the bottleneck but also be a strong leader. And I'm very excited to dive into that here in a few minutes. But kind of, so 2016 hit and you exited, and then how did you decide to create the Mind methodology?
Well, this is for me, a 40-year journey to come up with this. What works, what doesn't work in the real world. And I felt like a mad scientist in a laboratory with my own businesses, and then working with dozens and then hundreds of other organizations. Because when you have control, being the CEO of an organization, at least a lot more control, you can drive things and make it happen. Totally different when you're just influencing an organization as an outside consultant or leadership coach, whatever that role is. So what will really work with 80% plus of all teams anywhere? That was my goal, and it's significantly higher than 80% in how it's working. So to your point here, I think about the top leader of an organization, the leadership team. They should have a very intentional way of creating value as an organization. They just should. Don't have 15 leaders and have 15 different ways of running, or creating value in these different functions.
Right.
Have an intentional way, and that's what I came up with here.
That's awesome. We're going to dive much deeper into this here in the next couple segments. So Lee, thank you for starting us off here. Folks, you can always go to exitology.com, click on Contact Us, send us a question, and we will answer it in a future episode. We'll be right back with you in 2 minutes.